The major events on this level are governed primarily by the forces of light and the forces of darkness, not by the masses.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah.
Not even by the political leaders, who really are, on the whole, at the level of the masses. There could be exceptions in history to that point. You'll have some very powerful, you might say negative, dark, whatever word you want to use, dictatorial leaders in history, of course, and even today.
Yeah.
But they will just be pawns. The real manipulators are from the highest realms and the lowest realms, even above level 6, by the way, the ascended masters, the cosmic forces where they are karmically allowed to intervene, and then you'll have the dark forces who are having tremendous success, even as we speak, in bringing about wars, in causing hatred, in funneling negative energies out there.
The Spiritual Freedom Show with Richard Lawrence, where politics is not the answer, materialism counts for nothing, and spirituality will set you free.
So Richard.
Darren.
So before we get stuck into the show today, which is about the force of light and the force of darkness, which I'm extremely excited to talk about with you, there are a few things I wanted to share with our audience.
Yes.
So we've been getting loads of great questions and comments, especially recently. Many views, 1,000 views and listens on the podcast that we also distribute. So a big thank you, I think, first of all, to everybody who's been tuning into the show. And if I might, I thought I'd read a few of these comments, as long as you don't blush, Richard.
No. Camera on Darren. But you're still saying we've had thousands of viewers and listeners, right?
Absolutely, and I think lots of new people as well finding the show, which is great.
It's wonderful, yeah. And I've seen these comments, and they are absolutely beautiful. Some of them, yeah.
I just wanted to share some of them because I thought they're very inspiring, and also it just shows new people discovering these teachings, what a difference it can make. So this person says, the best video on the Israel-Hamas war I've seen so far when it comes to the spiritual aspect of the current situation. And I love that because we were really trying to bring something new to the discussion about the war in that case.
Yeah, let's take the politics out of it.
Exactly.
Let's take even religious dogma out of it and go above that.
Exactly.
There is an old saying which appears in all these religions, or most of them, which is very simple. It's a simple law: "Thou shalt not kill." So I'll leave that.
What about sticking with that?
Yeah.
We've got another one here from this person who says, got to love this series, teaching me a lot while being entertaining, and that was about psychic vision. And I think, for anyone who might be coming back to some of those videos as part of the psychic series that we did, I thought they were extremely revealing, especially based on, the awesome experience that you have and the personal stories that you could share. This person said, wow, this talk left me absolutely fascinated, great job. And that was about psychic powers, fact versus fiction, which I think, that helps to distill for people, okay, what is true and what isn't, and how can I experience this for myself?
Yeah, and I think, and this slightly links to what we're going to talk about, but some of the deluded claims that people make as mediums, which are a result sometimes of sincerely held, they believe this, a lot of the mediums, and they're being conned by, miscreants, you might say, random wandering forces who want to cause confusion, and they are causing confusion, and they're putting people off.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done TV interviews, on UFOs, very serious, it went very well, and then the same station will bring in somebody with making outlandish, ridiculous claims about extraterrestrial contact, clearly unverifiable and so forth. And of course, this is all deliberate. And so what I would add to that is some of this confusion and delusion of mediums and channels is very deliberate, very concentrated and intentional. And it goes, I'm sorry to say, deeper than the actual perpetrators. They are themselves being influenced, directed, whatever, by those who want to take people away from the truth and sow seeds of confusion and make it look more ludicrous than it is, and cause ridicule and all the rest. It's a deliberate attempt because they don't want the light, but we're coming on to that later.
Yeah, well, it's a great, hold that thought, because we will definitely come to it. And just in my own experience, just seeing the way that they're able to successfully discredit a lot of genuine spiritual ideas.
By association.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, if I came across a lot of claims and I didn't have the perception to look deeper, I'd think this is a whole load of nonsense.
Exactly.
And that's what they want.
Yeah.
And then people go, oh, forget that. That's,
yeah. And in a world of like attention deficit, when you have 3 seconds.
Yeah. But then you look and you'll find the real ones. And I think, it's said in our teaching, it's the pearls on the, among the dust, or was that on the road. And, there's plenty of dust and stones, but then occasionally there's a pearl like the 9 freedoms.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'll share just one or two more here. So super fascinated by the supernatural, and this video made me subscribe to your channel for more amazing content. And that was actually on the back of the video of Tolstoy and Dante, etc. that we talked about. So I thought it was great to get those experiences out to help. I got other ones from people who were just sort of amazed that it was possible to channel these personalities from the past who are living now in the other realms and able to still offer this, this wisdom and this teaching, based on their own study.
I mean, I was talking to someone the other day, and they asked me this question. They said, "Why is it that you have so many different communicators?" Because most mediums, they'll have more than one often, but they won't have a massive number of people.
That's an interesting question.
And I've had a massive number. I mean, I've had some of them have gone on my website. I mean, I'll have a medieval writer that I've never heard of, Geoffrey of somewhere, de Longpre, or some name I don't know. I look him up, and he did exist.
Wow, interesting.
And I get one message from him, or somebody called Father John, or a particular Tibetan. I get one message, who I just get maybe I'll get a name, maybe I won't get a name. Jetson, in this case, or I just got the name Jetson, which is a fairly common name. I've got an idea who it might have been, but often, and I've found this too, the higher you go, the less interested they are in giving their identities.
I see.
And certainly the less interested they are in validating themselves. And often the simpler the messages are, strangely.
Interesting, yeah.
And on the face of it, less impressive sometimes, but until you look deeply into it.
Yeah, it's like you're getting more into this rarefied atmosphere of...
But I mean, I attribute this wide range of communicators really to Dr. George King and the Aetherius Society. I think that's the reason. It's not because of me. It's because there's a lot of people on the other realms, far more than there are in this realm, who are interested in the Aetherius Society and what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so who do they go to? They're not masters, they're not adepts. I'm not a master, I don't claim to be an adept. They come to me, and so I get these messages, and it's very eclectic. And with the poetry, you mentioned the poetry, there was a deliberate campaign, not my idea. But again, you mentioned Dante. He's one of the few people who bothered and really tried to understand what goes on in the lower realms.
That's right, and another good teaser today.
And it's quite rare. I mean, most people avoid it like the plague, which
literally
you can understand why. It's not nice. It's not attractive. It's not appealing. I won't interrupt your flow, but I mean, I'll come back to that. But Dante at least tried to look at it.
Yeah, and I think that I'm sure there's a point you're going to come onto there about what we need to introduce into the sort of dialogue around the New Age.
Yeah.
But I do want to say a couple other things here, which is that we've been running this show weekly for almost 2 years now, if you can believe that. 3, I think, total, running the show, 3 total. First, there's a 15-minute show in the last 2 years, which you told us was a little bit too short.
Yeah, we got that feedback. And people were a bit frustrated. They felt, and we were interrupting ourselves.
It was a
15
bit.
minutes. Oh,
yeah.
Just getting going.
Yeah, that's what it felt like. And now, we have this kind of longer format.
We go to a natural length, really, don't
on video, and I think we both like this format. I know our audience does too. So our plan is definitely to carry on in this format and to go to a fortnightly show in the future from this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're the boss. You tell me. I just turn up.
So with those things, obviously just round that out and say thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you very, very much, everybody, for your wonderful comments and feedback.
Totally. We love doing it, as Richard's already said.
We do.
And
we look forward to it, don't we?
Yeah, I can't wait to share more, especially today's show. So let me dive into that. You'll remember we did a show some months back on the global conspiracy. I think that's what we called it, right?
That had a lot of views.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. I think it's a topic that really taps into the zeitgeist, particularly now, of people. And one way I thought that show really stood out is that it really pulled back the curtain, so to speak, on what really goes on behind the scenes with the forces of darkness, shall we call them, on Earth. And I think you gave a good clarification recently, not because of anything to do with color, but because they are the opposite to being enlightened, which is what we're really...
Yes, nothing to do with color. They're called dark forces sometimes because they're unenlightened. And that's why the word is used. Yeah, the opposite to enlightened.
Yeah. So I think there are, I can't think of any other show that I've seen, at least, where people really do that, really pull back the curtain on what is going on behind the scenes with these forces of darkness. There's plenty of people who talk about conspiracies of one kind or another, but they're not really ever talking about, number one, who is responsible, and number two, where they are operating from, which I think is a unique aspect of what we can bring to this conversation here.
Yeah.
And I wanted to return this conversation, especially in the context of this extremely dangerous conflict that's brewing or overspilling right now in the Middle East, not to mention the war that's really going on in Ukraine. So that people can be, better armed with the truth about what is really going on with our world, and also what they can do to change the world for the better. Because I think if you don't really understand what we're going to talk about today, you can't really see what role there is necessarily for you to play as a spiritual worker, as someone who's trying to be one of these forces of light. What I thought we'd start is. We talked recently about a quote actually by the Master Aetherius. And I thought maybe we'd kick off with that, because I think it sort of introduces...
I've got it right here. And I didn't know you were going to mention it. It's right on the top of my folder. Okay. Yeah.
Maybe we can start with that, because then you can share that with us, and maybe what some of the implications of that are.
So let's read the quote. And this was the Master Aetherius. And interestingly enough, it was at the end of a transmission about increased flying saucer activity.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And there is, one can't avoid the fact that with the cover-up of UFO information that's gone on, hasn't ended now. There's been an improvement this year, but it hasn't ended. It's got the hands of the dark forces all over it, that cover-up. But this is the quote: "No saint can ever be a saint in heaven unless he has been a saint in hell. No saint can ever be a saint in heaven unless he's been a saint in hell."
I don't think you hear that anywhere else.
No, and it's very unusual. Now, let me stress, and listeners and viewers will know this, we focus nearly always on the forces of light. And I think that's the right thing to do. And in fact, the 9 freedoms is all about the forces of light, and as it goes higher and higher and higher, all the way to the solar lords.
Nice way to think about it.
They are literally our forces of light, the solar lords. That's exactly, precisely
literally,
what they are.
Yeah,
radiating light. So that's what we do, and the 12 blessings likewise is all about forces of light. So this is the key thing. But if you don't study, now none of us are claiming to be saints. I mean, I'm certainly not. If any of our viewers and listeners are saints, then please let us know.
But the line's open. Yeah.
But we are students of wisdom, we're students of truth, and if you don't include in that study, that contemplation, the darker aspects, it won't be complete. Your wisdom will not be complete. It will be, to some degree, escapism. Because tragically enough, on this earth, and not only on this earth, but certainly on this earth, there are dark forces. And you can't understand the world. I mean, the machinations and the maneuverings on the physical plane, the plane we live on, this realm of earth, where there's a mixture. This is what makes this realm completely unique. The other realms, are, the higher realms and even the lower ones, are peopled by souls, beings, intelligences, earth people, who are roughly on an equivalent level of evolution.
Each one of these levels.
So if you go to level 2, all the people on level 2, they might be very different in character, although it's a bit of a characterless realm, I gather. Sorry. But, it's a bit predictable and dull, and so I gather. But nevertheless, that's by the by. They're what a lot of people would call good people. Some would find that much too complementary.
I see.
They're very predictable. The sort of ordinary people who haven't done much special with their lives, but haven't done bad either. Go there, you know. And anyway, putting that aside, those people will tend to be much on an equivalent level of evolution. As you go up 3, 4, 5, when you get to level 6, you're dealing there with adepts, masters, from very different traditions.
Yeah, okay.
You might have a great Tibetan adept, and you might have a Christian saint, a real one. Although I think Dr. King did say he's hardly ever met a saint in his life, and those he had were more likely to be Buddhists. But however, we'll put that aside.
Interesting.
You might meet, though, a truly saintly individual, let's just say that, from any tradition, Christian, Jewish, mystical, Hindu, yogic, but they will all be at the sort of adept master, terrestrial adept master level, on level 6.
Okay.
Very advanced people. Some of them have been there for a long time. And likewise, as you go down, and the lower you go, and there are 4 levels below this one, which people don't really like to talk about, they're also on equivalent levels. And as you get to the bottom, you've also got people who've been there a very long time, some far longer, actually, than any other realm. The few real controllers.
I see.
So when you look at this realm we're on, though, because we all reincarnate here,
Yeah.
strangely, some on the lowest realms try to avoid reincarnation. I just want to throw in there's a very evil belief, sorry to upset anyone here, in some Orthodox Christianity, that there's a place of eternal damnation and hell. And this feeds into the fantasies and wishes of dark forces, because they like to think they're eternal.
I see, yeah.
And they're not eternal.
I never thought of that connection, but yeah, it's pretty dark.
It's may not have been done with that intention, but that idea. And also, you get an equivalence in some teaching between God and the devil. You know, this is the force of good, this is the force of bad, and they're put on the same thing, which again is ridiculous. We've talked about what God is before.
Yeah.
That's one of our most popular videos, actually. How,
Yeah.
you know, you can know
Not your
God.
average take on God.
Yeah, not your average take on God. It's absolutely ridiculous and feeds the self-importance of the dark forces, because they aren't in the... Well, you can't even make a comparison of any kind between any living intelligence, good or bad, actually, and God, you know, except that we all have the divine spark within us, including all the dark forces.
Yeah.
And that's a very encouraging point, because we are much more positive than that. We're saying that these, even the dark forces, and Dr. King made it clear once that even if you go to hell, you can always climb the stairs and go to heaven again. And we will, everybody will climb those stairs from whatever level we're on right now. But here on this realm, everyone's thrown together, so you can have Gandhi and Hitler living in the same century on the same realm. And that's what makes it very different. But you'll only understand this realm if you realize that the primary movers and shakers, if you like, the manipulators, if you like to use that term, in the case of the higher forces, it won't be manipulating and controlling people, but it will be bringing the right energies wherever they can to bear upon a situation, which can be accepted or rejected.
Yeah.
In the lower case, they will try to manipulate, and sometimes very successfully. But you'll only understand it if you realize the major events on this level are governed primarily by the forces of light and the forces of darkness, not by the masses.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah.
Not even by the political leaders, who really are, on the whole, at the level of the masses. There could be exceptions in history to that point. You'll have some very powerful, you might say negative, dark, whatever word you want to use, dictatorial leaders in history, of course, and even today.
Yeah.
But they will just be pawns. The real manipulators are from higher realms, the highest realms, and the lowest realms, even above level 6, by the way, the ascended masters, the cosmic forces, where they are karmically allowed to intervene. And then you'll have the dark forces who are having tremendous success even as we speak, in bringing about wars, in causing hatred, in funneling negative energies out there. And then in the middle, you have people who gravitate. Well, most people don't gravitate in either direction. They just want to have, inverted commas, a happy life. And that's that. But those who do get engaged in trying to make a difference, you know, they'll try and cooperate with the higher forces. And those who want to better themselves will think they're doing very well. I'll just say one thing, though, about those people who choose the darker path, and they may not consider themselves to be dark or magical people. They might consider themselves to be political people or military people. But by and large, they are unsuccessful. You only have to look at how a lot of these, not all, but a lot of these sort of very powerful dark figures end up, which is very often suicide, very often in a bunker, very often with nobody, no love from anybody from them, and their closest, you know, helpers become their rivals, and the sooner they can get rid of them, the better, because they want their power. So they live an isolated, lonely, and very often unsuccessful in the end existence. And you can see many examples of that. You can even see it on a much lower level, and I'm not comparing this among, say, gangsters and people like that. You know, if you look into that, they usually end up either in prison, dead, hiding, maybe underground, in a very primitive way. It's not a successful thing to aspire to, but people do aspire to it because of the drug of power.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of revelations there. One in particular, the sort of like the proxy nature of how this works out. I think, you know, just as an analogy, people can see it in a lot of the wars that take place on Earth. Usually, two major powers will be fighting between their proxies, who they're financing in some way, or encouraging, or lending aid to. And you know, it's kind of similar to the situation you're describing, in which, yes, it might be politicians and companies who are being pitted against each other, but who's really behind the scenes pulling the strings of these puppets?
Well, I think there's one thing to say here again, is that people on the whole don't understand the importance of dying correctly. Now, I mentioned most of the people who go down the darker path don't end up in a good place. If you did end up, though, in what you regarded as a good place, if you were, like, in your terms, successful, that would be, like, karmically the worst thing that could happen to you, actually.
As a dark force, you mean?
Yeah, just you as a soul. Because then you've got to come back and learn lessons far, far more. So it's not a good ending, really. It may appear to be to you. And, of course, the other thing, though, it's very important how you die, as I was saying. Now, some Tibetans really understood and may still understand this. Some of the Egyptians did. You've got the Egyptian and the Tibetan books of the dead, which show they cultivated a way of dying which would relate to where they went after they died. This is my point. Now, if you're engaged in a war, you might be, up to now, a very ordinary person, living quite an ordinary life, doing a job, perhaps with a family, not doing much good or bad, and you might be, as I mentioned earlier, heading straight for level 2 when you pass on. But if you get recruited into a war, and you get filled with anger, hate, you know, desire to kill, and you start killing and so forth, you will be going down. And of course, what people don't realize is your last state of mind is absolutely key to where you go. It isn't the total key, because there's obviously a judgment made actually by your own higher self, ultimately, as to where you go, where you need to go to be on an equivalent level. But you, the person who up to this war you were recruited into, was quite an ordinary person doing no particular harm to anybody. You've now become a killer, a warmonger, a nationalist. You know, you're fighting for what you believe is a cause, and you've suddenly you've transformed yourself, and you may be transformed at the moment of your death. Your very last thoughts could be thoughts of anger, hate, you know, as I say, the desire to kill and so on. And this will take you down. And that is what these dark forces want. They want to. They're recruiting.
When they're manufacturing these.
Yeah, they're very interested in their own realms. They're interested in this realm, and they've got quite a reasonable degree of success here. Not as much as they'd like, but they do interfere in some ways. And we talked about that, didn't we, on the global conspiracy? Yeah. That's like the missing link in people who talk about the global conspiracy. Sure. Usually they don't factor in the mystical aspects to it, which are key, really. Yeah, but that's and Dr. King made he explained this brilliantly, and he made this very, very clear, that that's one of the reasons that wars happen, just simply to recruit people and turn people and change people from what they were. Dark forces don't like people just pottering about leading a contented life. It doesn't worry them too much because it doesn't threaten them, but what they want is to cause confusion, pain, dismay, suffering, and of course a war is, as we can see right now, a terrible way to do it.
It's a tragedy, even on every single individual soul.
Which is why, as we said in our video, that we had these nice comments about send out light. Send out light. Don't, and I want to say this very clearly, I am not advocating here anybody who watches this or listens to this tries to take on dark forces themselves. It's a dangerous thing to do. You need to do protective practices anyway, but I wouldn't recommend that. Just carry on sending out light to the world and use the violet flame practice, which we've taught before. And maybe at the end of the show, actually, we could teach again.
Yeah, that might be a good thing to teach.
And use that regularly. That'll protect you, but keep sending out the light.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that we'll definitely come back to at the end of the show, something useful that people can do as a part of applying what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So basically we're talking about these low astral realms, vibrationally lower than this plane that we're talking about now, from which people are operating to manipulate, even more than influence, things that are going on in this realm to further their ends of ultimately the thirst for power. But I mean, like, who are they, and what's the reason?
I find this quite interesting. I mean, it isn't pleasant. I mean, I haven't gone to, I think it's Madrid, and looked at the paintings of the master Goya, who I believe is an ascended master. I'd quite like to, as a matter of fact. But I've seen images of them. I'm talking now about what are known as his black paintings.
Okay.
And he's another one. I mean, what he was known for was, and I'm no art expert. My wife is. I'm not.
Okay.
But he is known for painting truth. So if he painted a war scene, for example, he'd show suffering, which hadn't been done by many artists. They'd shown the glory, so-called, of war and the great victory and the victorious people, not somebody dying with one leg blown off or whatever it might be. So he was doing that, and then he did these black paintings, and they are really quite unpleasant, and people get quite disconcerted, I gather, when they do go to the museum there and see them. By them, and they are exposing a truth. As I mentioned Dante earlier, it's quite rare, and you can see why it's not pleasant. And lots of people, I have told, I think, the story before of a woman who was sent by her guide to help me in Australia after I'd done a radio interview. And she didn't believe what I was saying at all. And one thing she was, just to recap very, very briefly, I came out of a radio show in a place called Wollongong, and I had a schedule that day. I was with somebody else who was helping me, but they had other things to do. And she was waiting in the studio, told me she'd been sent by her guide to help me.
Incredible.
And she had her car at my disposal and was able to drive me to the TV studio and other places in Wollongong. And I don't quite know how we'd have managed the day without her help.
Amazing.
But she didn't believe any of it. And one of the things she really didn't like and didn't even want to discuss was dark forces or any... She thought, and I think you'll find this in the New Age movement, even talking about it is a negative thing and bad energy. And I can understand that, by the way. It's not completely untrue, which is why we don't do it very often, even on this show. But it's got to be done with caution, with protection, But it is an aspect of truth. It's an unpalatable aspect of truth. And we have to look at it if we're going to really understand what's going on in our world. It's not just the wars. It's the manipulation of wealth. It's you know, the massive differences between the poverty and the rich, and the tremendous need. It's the cruelty. It's so many other things, the debauchery, the debasement in so many regards. You know, you could look at the drug trade and many things that this is one. But I want to stress this, though. Most of the people who are in the lower astrals, as we call them, the lower realms, used to be called hell, or the hells, and could be called that. But it's not like a fiery furnace with you're not being, you know, pitchforks. And it could be a bit more like I don't know, parts of London, parts of New York, and it could be a bit retro. It could be you're still living in an earlier time.
I see.
And it can be, but it could be very futuristic with a science way ahead of us. I mean, these are you know, if you're talking about the most powerful of them, brilliant people. I know that may sound strange.
It's difficult to,
yeah. I mean, brilliant in science, a science that's way ahead. I mean, Dr. King revealed some of the things about these people back in the very early 1960s. And some of the science he spoke about, what was going on then, has come to light on this realm since. So, you know, which is another proof, of course, of his authenticity. But it shows they were ahead of what was happening here.
Yeah.
But what I want to stress is that I'm not talking about most of the inhabitants of those realms. They aren't the powerful manipulators.
I see.
They are just cooperators or pawns or people who want to carry on their indulgence, their, you know, the killing, their gangs, their whatever it might be. But they're also, and I think they're despised by their leaders. They kind of venerate their leaders, and their leaders despise them. That's what I think goes on. But there are a smallish number of extremely powerful manipulators. And, of course, one of the things about them, they don't really... And I get my information from Dr. King, who was an absolute expert on this, cooperate together. They're really all after each other's positions anyway, as you would get a lot on this earth.
Yeah.
Every politician, it seems to me, in this country thinks they're a budding prime minister. They all seem to think that. And that's at a very low level, indeed. That's not comparable. So, that goes on. So they're not very secure in their positions, but they're the ones who want to, for whatever reasons they have, which would be power and control, control the goings-on our realm.
I think, you know, what you'll bring up here is that, and just going back to the point you made right in the beginning about it, it's kind of a fantasy or escapism not to acknowledge this. And in the same way that, you know, if you were turning a blind eye to something within yourself, you know, if we took it right down to an individual level, something that really something that you needed to bring out and heal within yourself. These are things that we need to bring out and heal in the consciousness of humanity as a whole. And and to be able to, the first step is to acknowledge that they're there, and then to take that healing action, which maybe we can do a little bit at the end of the show, at least with the violet flame.
I'm not advocating people focus on this, make it their main or their specialist subject, just to recognize it, be aware of it, understand what goes on, and then keep focusing on the light, of course. That is the absolute key. Just
one point before we go to that is just a little bit more about how do they stay down there for so long, for example? I mean, what is going on? I mean,
Dr. King made a quite shocking statement, actually, about some of the I'm going to use this word, most advanced of them. And their capabilities are immense. Their psychology is very interesting to me, while being quite repulsive to me. But one thing that Dr. King said, you know, he kind of treated them with a certain respect, which may sound odd, like you would an opponent.
You
can't underestimate them. But at the same time, they have fatal flaws. And so you ask whether they, you know, how they stay there for so long. He did say that some of the worst of them have corrupted their souls. Now, it's the soul, our souls, that actually determines our reincarnation, our next incarnation. They've developed magical powers. They have tremendous psychic, powers. And I've said before, when we were talking about psychic powers, I've said many times, psychic powers aren't of themselves good. They are quite natural, and they will be part of our development.
Yes.
But they can be abused. There's a couple of points I feel I should make here. One is, there is no such thing, and this is another mistake. We talked about the mistake of the 7 deadly sins, whereas in fact, there aren't 7 deadly sins, there's one sin only. So that's a mistake. Another of the mistakes they make in orthodox thinking is there's such a thing as original sin. There is no original sin. There is original good. There is original God. There is original perfection.
This is a great point. Yeah.
It was a potential that then came into being and then brought into being involution. This is something I now know and understand, as, from experiences I've had. Involution only exists so that evolution can take place. Involution is a complication, a perversion of good. But good was there first. It doesn't exist in its own right. They like to think it does, but it doesn't. Hence some black magic rites, as they used to be called black magic rites, will distort good rites. I'm not going to say any more than that, because I don't want to give any information that could be misused. There is no such really original good. Original sin. There's original good. These very advanced dark forces, have corrupted their soul, and they have developed their magic. But what they don't have, by definition, particularly if they've corrupted their soul, if they've gone that far, is a link to their intuition. And this is a big flaw. Because whatever psychic powers, and when I teach people to develop psychic powers, I stress, and I learned this myself, even in mediumship, never lose sight of your inner voice, your inner flame. No matter who's communicating through you, don't just give way to the communicator. You've got to keep your own inner light. If you develop your psychic powers, they're really only useful if you're giving a reading to someone, and I've given hundreds of readings, as you know. It's only of any value, the psychic impressions you will get, if you can interpret them, and you need your intuition to interpret them correctly.
I see.
Dark forces aren't interested in helping anybody, so they wouldn't be doing that.
Right.
But they've cut themselves away from their intuition. And the intuition at its most basic level is still a link, a very far removed one, but a link to your higher self. As it gets higher and higher and it becomes high intuition, you're really tapping into that voice of God within you. And okay, at a distant level, but that's what you're aiming for, because we are God, and we can know God, and God is, and God exists, there's no doubt about that at all, and we can contact it through our higher self. Now, they have to cut themselves away from this if they want to go down that route, because if they didn't, they would be open to all kinds of higher promptings, which would include conscience. Which could manifest as guilt. There's appropriate guilt and inappropriate guilt. There's guilt which is a result of conditioning, which may be inappropriate. In my lifetime, I grew up being told that it was immoral to be homosexual. And now I'm told it's immoral to be homophobic. So those are, I'm not going down the rights and wrongs of any of it, really. I'm certainly glad it's not illegal. It was illegal when I was a boy. But, that's just an example of how cultural norms change and people have guilt foisted upon them. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about true conscience from the higher self, which gives you a proper moral compass, which is a spiritual moral compass, if you like. That's coming from the higher self, not that we always follow it, not that I've always followed it. I'm not claiming I have. But that is there, and that's what we should aspire to. They have deliberately and concertedly cut themselves away. They have to. So with the intuition and the higher guidance would come conscience and would sooner or later lead to compassion. Because they're all linked.
And totally at odds with what they're doing.
And they certainly can't deal with that. They train themselves to be completely cold. So they have some fatal flaws as a result of this. And they can make mistakes as a result of this. And they are foolish enough, I'm not going to be liked for saying this, to believe that they can overcome reincarnation forever, which they can't.
I see.
Sooner or later, this is a sort of strange ignorance, whereas, you know, people in the world who aren't necessarily believers in what we're talking about, they nevertheless have an instinctive belief or acceptance of karma.
Totally.
I find. They use other words. They might say, what have I done to deserve this? That immediately is saying there's some law there that relates to what you deserve.
Yeah.
Or they'll say, what goes around comes around.
Absolutely, yeah.
And actually, now, the word karma, it didn't used to be, in the 70s even, but now it's everywhere. It's in, you see it in newspaper headlines, you see it in shows, television shows, it's in songs, it's in rap songs, it's very universally used. I think John Lennon may have been one of the first to put it in a song, but however, it's now very generic. So this is known even by people who aren't looking for deep spiritual truth as a thing, but they absolutely have to reject any idea of karma. So they can't see that in the end it can't work. And that is a fatal flaw.
Yeah, that is a very strange aspect of the psychology, as you say, and sort of like was trying to beat evolution, the evolutionary impulse that is within the nature of creation.
Yeah, and it gets ever more complicated as you move away from truth. Truth in its very essence is simplicity. Thou shalt not kill. Very simple. When you start to complicate it, and you know, of course there are occasions where you can see that you might have to kill in order to stop killings. Could happen. So actually in that case you're living that teaching. But once you start sort of, well, in this case and in that case, and it gets more and more complicated, you end up losing these pure, simple truths.
I think that's it. There's so many revelations there, I think, in the way that people can think about, what's really going on and who's responsible. And I think we can just leave people, as you say, with just kind of a statement of what they can do about it. Maybe we can do the
I would like to just say that the intelligence that delivered the 9 freedoms, Mars Sector 6, also delivered a transmission, a historic transmission, I believe, called Fight Ye the Evil.
Yes.
And this was a big change, because even in Christianity, even Jesus himself did teach, turn the other cheek. He taught a great path of forgiveness. Forgiveness is an essential tool, absolutely vital tool, something we've talked about before. It has its place for sure. But in this day and age, Mars Sector 6 tells us you have to fight the evil, but not fight it with weapons of war. Fight it with weapons of truth. Fight it with weapons of light. And one of those weapons is the violet flame. And this is a wonderful transmuting practice, and maybe we should teach people to do that. Yeah. So the best way to do that would be to remove any rings or watches you're wearing. Don't do this while driving if you're listening in your car. I say that, though, but you can actually sometimes visualize violet flame coming through a car, but keep your concentration on the road.
Driving.
That's the advice from the Spiritual Freedom Show. So if you have your palms facing downwards on the knees and the shoulders just a bit relaxed, and you close the eyes, which we'll do here in the studio now, and then you start to tune into the Mother Earth. The Mother Earth who allows us on her back to become good or evil or whatever we choose. She allows that freedom of choice without ejecting her. She has to put up with the dark practices and the killings and the hate which do exist in some places on our world, on her world, herself. Let's tune into her, Mother Earth, and request of her violet flame which comes from deep from within the earth. And now visualize this coming up through you, through the feet, through the legs, through the trunk, through the upper part of your body, up through the top of your head and 30 or 40 feet above you. And as you do this, also visualize it around you, because around us is an aura, a psychic counterpart, an etheric counterpart, several inches around us. Visualize the violet flame traveling through this, through the mind bodies, as well as the physical body, just for a few moments, and up above the head. You can spend longer doing this, and the wonderful way to do this, by the way, is barefoot on the earth or outside on the grass. The earth itself would be wonderful, but it can be done top of a multi-story building. You can still bring it up through and around you. And when you've finished, pass one palm across the other and cease the practice. And that's a wonderful, it's protection if you ever feel you need protection. Mm-hmm. You could be in an office doing that, no one needs even know. And you can protect yourself from if there are unpleasant vibrations, jealousy, hate, sure. anger, and so on. But also, it's a transmuter, and it will tend to lift the energies. And some people who don't know you're even doing it, maybe, will wonder why. Why has the atmosphere changed? And I've experienced that. I actually met one person when I was at university, with John Holder and I used to run a group up there called the Hull Group. And we had one person who attended, and he actually could always smell that violet flame, wow. which is very unusual.
Yeah, psychic kind of ability.
And some people have seen it, and you can see it, and I have seen it. And so it starts as a visualization, because what you're doing, and a good visualization, I think you're connecting with something that's real. You're using the creative power of imagination to connect with something that does exist, rather than just some fantasy thing.
Sure.
And this does exist, and it will become real. And over time, not every time, but over time, you'll start to, even with your eyes closed, you can see it. Yeah, I mean, I remember doing a whole campaign we ran about the Mother Earth one year. You might remember it. And I was doing a talk on it, and I went to bed that night, and I felt like the Purple Man. I was just like a purple man lying there. The energy was, I don't know whether it was coming back from her or whatever.
Interesting.
It's a violet energy, but it seemed purple that night. Yeah, it's a real thing. It definitely exists, and many people have sensed it. And I think most of all, you can feel it. It's a caressing, velvety fingers. You feel that.
Yeah. And I think, practice it. That's what we're offering
Absolutely.
you here, an opportunity to practice something very versatile. We just talked about the different contexts in which you can use it. Certainly, I've done those things, and have seen the reaction from people, and also the difference it makes in myself. And I think that's certainly something that we can leave everyone with, on the basis of our topic today.
Yeah, I would just add one thing about it that we don't often practice, but it can be channeled. You can actually also radiate it. To others. If you're in a situation, you can start to channel it, and you might find a big change comes over people. You're not trying to control them. I will stress that, ever. No one on the side of light tries to control others, but you're sending energy for their use if they choose to accept it. And even at a subtle level, they might choose. At a superconscious or subconscious level, they might choose. They may not even know consciously it's there, but they might change. And an angry person might suddenly become calm.
I think it's great inspiration, and especially, this path we advocate over and over again, that it's about direct experience of these things, direct experience of truth. I certainly encourage you to try it for yourself, and to acknowledge these things as we say, but turn your attention to the work that we're really concerned with, which is radiating this light energy into the world and epitomizing
and the forces of light.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you.
Everybody's down here. Thanks for tuning into the show. Now, if you enjoyed that episode, don't forget to subscribe for more wisdom from the 9 Freedoms. If you'd like to find out more about the 9 Freedoms, about Mars Sector 6 by Dr. George King, go to our website, that's aetherius.org. Richard and I love hearing from you, receiving your comments, your questions on your spiritual experiences, and talking about them on the show. So do write to us, share them with us at spiritualfreedom@richardlawrence.co.uk. Always remember that service is the jewel in the rock of attainment. See you next time.